Hi, my name is Frederick. Welcome to the Epic Endurance Podcast, where we take a deep dive into endurance, strength, and conditioning. Today, we are going to talk about PEDs, performance enhancing drugs. This is a heavy topic. We're talking about PEDs in triathlon mostly, and what are my thoughts about it and what historically is probably happening. Without further ado, here we go. To put things in context, we have to understand a bit the history of triathlon. We can break this down into a couple of areas. Everything that predates 1970s, I will say the dark ages. In the early 1920s, in France, there was something called les trois sports, which means the three sports, where you had cycling, swimming, sometimes kayaking and running. And it was never in a specific order, never in a specific distance. It was claimed to be a new sport, but it never really caught on. It was organized here and there. The level was not very, very high back then, obviously, but in terms of regulation, probably nothing. Most likely anything was okay, everything was on the table, no idea what people were taking. And then in the 1970s, you had creation and regulation in San Diego, California, the structure of triathlon, which is a swim, bike, run. In this format, specific distances. 70s and 80s were the Wild West. There was not really any testing. People were most focused on the endurance aspect of things, on the achievement, the incredible achievement that some of the athletes were doing. What was going down under table or behind the scenes was unknown, but we can speculate. There were quite a few athletes that were coming from cycling backgrounds that were pretty well known for using things. Very likely that the prevalence of PEDs were quite high in this time, 70s and 80s, most likely not for everyone, but there was no regulation, so people took whatever they wanted, and that went this way. In the early 1990s to the very late 1990s, early 2000s, more testing was done, more federation, ITU, Ironman, World Triathlon Circuit started doing their own testing. WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency, was founded in 1999, so it was much later. And even then, drug testing was mostly done for pro athletes. I believe that the World Triathlon Corporation did not consistently test age group athletes in its races until the 2000s, and testing protocols were pretty simple. The people were taking drugs that were very difficult to be tested, or sometimes some drugs were not tested at all. I believe, for example, like anaerobic steroids before that in the late 70s were completely okay to use in competition. Things like EPO, which is very often used in endurance sport as it gives a very, very strong advantage in performance, was always a difficult drug to test. And until like the 2000s, we didn't really have any means to test EPO. So usage of EPO was probably much higher than what we believe. Even like things like growth hormones were not being able to be tested until 2004. Blood transfusion, so storing your own blood and then reusing them to increase the amount of hemoglobin you have available, therefore being able to carry more oxygen, was not detectable also until the mid-2000s, so not very long ago. It's always been very difficult to test, and especially designer drugs, so technical advances in terms of drug progression, how people that manufacture drugs to escape detection has been like a mouse and cat game, where right now the cat is catching up, so testing is becoming better, which leads us to our current thing, the prevalence of drug in triathlon right now. And I'm going to give you my opinion. In pro triathlon nowadays, I think using drugs is difficult. The testing pool for pro athletes is more strict, but doesn't mean that it's a fail net. There have been pro triathletes that do use drugs and have been caught. There are definitely ways to escape, but chances of being caught are quite high. Some athletes that have been tested and found, whether in triathlon, things often claim contamination. So eating a contaminated sandwich or engaging in a relationship with a partner and having drugs being passed on them, usually they get banned or they get put out of competition for a couple of years. I do believe like in the pro side of things, the most commonly found drug was EPO. But nowadays there have been new drugs found like clomiphene, which is an estrogen receptor receptor modulator, which also improve endurance, normally used for fertility treatment, but it can be used as a post-steroid cycle. So they're drugs that are used for hiding other drugs. You can say like the range of PEDs that are often used will be blood boosters like EPO, anaerobic steroids that make you stronger, hormones that can also change the way you resist, endure, and react to training. Other modulators that maybe precede these things and affects, we talked about blood doping, so stirring your own blood, also increasing the volume mass of your blood. You have other kinds of doping, like things that make you clear in your head. Adderall, which is ADHD medication, but gives you an edge and can definitely improve performance by helping you focus on things. If you go on WADA or USAID, then you can have a list of banned substances, and then you also have another website called globaldro.com, which lists all the approved drugs, when they're approved, for what sports one can use them. But coming back to the prevalence for professionals, the exact number is difficult to know, obviously, because sometimes some performance seem a bit off, and when people are doing things that are exceptional, it's always difficult not to raise your eyebrow. We have to acknowledge that even though most athletes are in the testing pool, the number of found athletes in this cycle is quite small, which again makes things a little complicated, especially when you take into account TUEs. Now, TUEs are therapeutic use exemption, so you're getting a medical clearance by your doctor to use specific drugs that are not supposed to help with performance, but help you bring you back to a healthy state. And when a doctor opens a file saying that you need this to be healthy, then you can use this drug. Of course, not every drug. EPO is not on the list, but some drugs which could potentially have performance enhancement can be listed in TUEs. The fancy bear leaks in 2016 kind of exposed also some of the endurance athletes' usage of or abuse of TUEs. So how TUEs were used precisely and timely before competition, and how this pattern sort of suggests that the usage was not made for health reason, but rather for performance reasons. So that might be also a way to use drugs and kind of navigate, definitely not the gray area, because this is should not be tolerated. Do pro triathletes use drugs? My belief is not all of them. I choose to believe that the vast majority don't. You will have some that do. Now, what is more interesting is the non-pro triathletes, the age groupers, the people that are fighting, and the testing sample size, although everyone is subjected to be tested, it's quite small. Most people don't get tested. They definitely don't get tested out of competition. They rarely get tested in competition. We have to acknowledge that triathlon is a very difficult sport, especially for people that are putting a lot of time. And when people see their performance plateauing or falling down because of age or because of life circumstances, then the amount of training or the quality of the training is dampened. Then when you're putting 10, 15, 20 hours per week into training, and you see people that are going faster than you, there is a push toward trying to find an edge. And this, combined with the fact that testing is not systematic and it will be too expensive to be systematic because it's not possible to test everyone, the financial consideration to do that will be too high. In an event where you have like an Ironman, let's say 2,000 people, you will have people using some kind of PEDs. There have been studies. There was like a landmark study in 2013 which randomized response using survey technique, and it was made among athletes in age group athletes in Germany, and the result was about 13% of people were using some form of performance enhancing drug, which is extremely high. I believe that there have been other studies like another survey done by Dr. Simon, who looked at 3,000 athletes, and in this study they found out that about 13.7% of men were using, as opposed to 8% of female athletes. And doping rates were higher during championship or places where competition was quite high. In 2019, there was another survey where they found out about 7%. And these are people that are anonymously just saying that they're using something. So we often have this range of different surveys. There are more in the 7 to 18% range of age groupers using PEDs. And that's a hard one to swallow for many people. I, on my side, don't think you should for many reasons. It changes the playing field. It encourages an unhealthy attachment to a certain kind of performance, and then performance in itself becomes flawed as the competition is using things that they should not. And this is why I encourage people to follow clean sport view and try for themselves to be healthy and not utilize these things. Now, of course, if you have a legitimate reason to make a TUE, then yes, you have to, because it's your health. Now, people are going to mention things like TRT, well, testosterone replacement therapy for older athletes, as or testosterone level kind of go down after 40 years old, but this is extremely rare and for very, very specific cases. Most of TUEs are going to be open for things that people have asthma or are under, like maybe they had a medical emergency or they are diabetic. But the problem with TUEs with age groupers can make a demand after the fact. I can't say it's completely unregulated. You do have to apply. Normally you should apply in advance, but if you have been, you can claim medical needs TUEs retroactive before. So in 2014, WADA itself, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency, found out that about 20% of athletes at some Olympic event had a TUE, often for beta-2 antagonists and corticosteroids, which are anti-inflammatory, but also will help with performance. Now, this number is very high. Some people are likely using this for legitimate reason. The volume, that 20% is, from my sense, is extremely high. And again, coming back to why age groupers probably dope more than the elite, qualifying for events, a desire to achieve better than their friends, or just believing that everyone is doing it. And again, even if these numbers I'm giving are pretty high, 20% of people are doing it, or 18% of people are doing it, you should flip things around and acknowledge that 80% of people are not doing it. It's not because you're doing that you are going to podium. You're going to be the fastest in your group. Some people might just be completely clean and just be the fastest in the field. I've had the opportunity to coach some triathletes that are gifted, hardworking, manage very, very high performances in their races without using anything to my knowledge. Another thing I did not mention is I think pro athletes in the recent years have adopted something that we call a blood passport, where basically their certain hormones levels are marked different points in time. And then we can kind of like see if these markers go too high or increase too fast, then there's something is amiss. So it's not a simple point to just looking at a trend of different biomarkers that will lead to performance enhancement. This is called the ABP, the Athlete Biological Passport. So to summarize everything we said today, we have to acknowledge, like in every kind of endurance sport or competitive sport, nothing is essentially clean. It's not possible. The desire to win when you are in a competition or achieve specific performance will force people to take immoral measures that are eroding the trust in the game. In the early days, things were wild. Right now, for professional, drug testing is somehow comprehensive, and the degree of confidence that you should have into pro athletes achieving performance should be much higher than it was 10 or 20 years ago. So this is a really big takeaway, is to believe that most of pro athletes are clean. Age groupers are going to be under more pressure to use PEDs because they don't get tested hardly ever in their entire life. It does not really happen very often. Pressure is high, training is hard, competition exists, opportunities are there. These things make a situation where this can happen. Question is, what can you do about it? My belief is that a lot of athletes go toward these things because, again, they are either having issues dealing with the intensity and the fatigue coming from training, and maybe they overtrain because they are very attached to certain performance goals and they have to juggle life and training. And some PDs can help with that, with recovery or with mental fatigue. Maybe reframing things as like seeing things as a part of a journey, and maybe letting go of some performance is a healthy thing to do. On the other side, some athletes are, again, looking for performance, and sometimes they plateau and they don't understand. I do believe that for most of athletes, there is a wide range of improvement possible when you work on efficiency. And when I mean efficiency is whether the metabolic or the biomechanical efficiency of things. You can find some pro athletes remain as fast in their older days as they were in their younger days, as being smarter in the way they race. Not by increasing volume, most of them reduce the volume, but by racing smarter, by looking at aerodynamics on the bike, by understanding metabolic limitation. Do they have breathing limitation? I do test these things, and of course I'm talking about this because I do test these efficiency when we do physiological or biomechanical assessment, where we can see what should be the norm and what is not always a norm for athletes. Some people maybe putting that much power and not coming for that. Or what I mean to say is, when athletes reach a plateau is a great opportunity to look at what system is hindering progress. And that in itself is a transformative experience. It is fun if you're conscious about it and if you're willing to play the game. If you just want to go with a sledgehammer and just make your body go in overdrive and take something that might just create some damage long term and hurt triathlon as a sport, then PEDs are something that you might be doing. And again, I don't advocate for this. I don't think you should. Performance should not be the end and all of those things. Your health should come first, and both the physical and mental health. This is why I call my website company usefully, which means U stands for good or healthy or something good, and then speed and strength. And the good is coming before performance. Health stands as the foundation to performance. I hope that this was not too depressing. Obviously, for most of you, and this is nothing surprising, in other endurance sports you'll find the same thing, if not more crazy. There is more money for elite and professional cyclists than there is in triathlon. So you'll find that maybe the prevalence among certain circles in other endurance sports is higher, or some other endurance sports are less tested than triathlon is. So things are not completely bad in triathlon sport, but they could be better if yourself just trying to avoid falling into this pitfall, into believing that this will make you a better athlete or better person. It might just make you a little faster, but there probably are other ways. On that note, I hope you have a great one. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Side note, I can leave like a couple of movies and documentaries to watch about these things, the one I included before, and of course Icarius and others. I just make a small list, and yeah, I'll see you next time.